The world is shifting. Inspiration is everywhere. We learn about the best in ourselves from each other. I'm Will McPherson, and you've hit rock bottom, building your health and happiness from the ground on up. Okay, everyone, we got a very special guest today, Neha, and she is the senior planner and designer at Cook County Department of Transportation and Highways, or the DOTH. So Neha, and it's, by the way, Neha's last name is Soni. She works in downtown Chicago. So Neha, thank you so much and welcome to the show.
Hey, Will, thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Okay, so what exactly is a senior planner at Cook County Department of Transportation? What do you do?
Wow, that's a big question.
It is.
So my background is in architecture, so I always like to call myself a designer. And so, design planning, I am very passionate about our cities in general, about built environment, where we live, and right now I work for the Department of Transportation and Highways. And, as the name suggests, I'm very much into deep waters, looking into all kinds of transportation in our city, like for Cook County. I work on a variety of bike and pedestrian planning, making our streets active. It's we call active transportation, building trails in the region, looking at connectivity, looking also into transit, very transit focused projects. So the idea here is to, provide those various choices of transportation to people. We do all have cars, we love to drive, we love highways, but at the same time, there are a lot of other options out there. So how can we make our cities, uh, you know, work around people of different ages and abilities and create those healthy communities, active communities. So that's sort of like, what really wakes me up each day. And I'm passionate about, deciding and planning of the cities in that sense.
Yeah, that sounds great. And how do you rank Chicago in terms of bikeability compared to some other cities that you've lived in?
Chicago
Be
is home
honest.
for me. Yes, I will be. So, but this is home for me. So, that's why I'm going to be biased because now I'm a proud Chicagoan. I have lived around a lot of different cities in the world. And it's again, every city is different and it's a different context. But for me personally, our perceptions, I say, they're always based on our personal experiences and values and, how we
Mhm.
perceive a place and our connection to people at local level. And if I have to put it in that perspective, Chicago is great. In some sense, I am just so proud to call this home.
And bikeability, let's compare the two big cities, right? New York versus Chicago. How do we rank I know the city's pouring money and resources into, biking lanes on the streets, safe right turns, safe left turns with those green spaces we're seeing. So how does that stack up against something like New York?
Right. I mean, again, it depends on how we are equating, apple to apples or, not apple to orange. But Chicago does rank, pretty high in terms of like, there was a recent standard that were released, and it's more than 100% more biking has increased in Chicago, which is like, a significant increase. And if I, have to answer like, how do we compare with New York? Again, it depends on, both cities have transit system. It's unique in its own context. They are both considered pretty walkable cities. But, there's this, as a designer, when you open any book comparing these two cities, first thing you see is like the blocks. Like Chicago has a square blocks, it's a square gridiron structure that has been laid on. And in many ways, it feels a lot more walkable because, you are walking much more quickly from, one intersection to the other
Mhm.
intersection. The block goes much faster. Whereas if you see the plan of New York is a rectangular gridiron structure. So that's why you have avenues and streets which are different. So, one is longer than the other. And in that sense, your experience sort of changes a little bit when you're out on the street walking. You feel like, it's a little bit far because you are trying to reach to the next intersection is taking a little bit longer than Chicago. So, those are like very finer design, minor differences that does create bigger experiences. So in that sense, I would say, like that's sort of like a plan that changes the experience in both cities. Again, every place has a different geography and, sort of how we value different natural resources, parks, waterfronts. Chicago has an amazing riverfront. It's, I think, one of the best in the world. The way there are, you see these buildings lined up on both sides of the street, and in recent years they've improved on the whole walking experience along the riverwalk, which is just really very unique and great,
It's
and
very
has this
very
and again, yeah,
Canyon-esque, right? You've got the tall
yes, yes,
buildings on
right.
the river, and back in the day, I mean, way back, I'm talking like the 20s and 30s, actually, the river was so polluted back then that the people would look away from the river and not to it. So, yeah, it's amazing
Right.
what the planners, have done to convert an open space into a civic space, a walkable civic space that generates quite a bit of income for the city as well. So pollution, I think we both agree, are deal killers for just about everything. That is amazing. So Neha, I think you're a very interesting person because you hail from India and you've lived all over the world. And I think, in pre-show, you mentioned growing up in Dubai, and your perspective from that. But I guess, where do you call yourself from? I mean, where'd you, where are your roots at?
Gosh, this is always like a tough question for me. This reminds me actually of a TED talk. I'd seen it was by Thais Salesi. The title was "Don't ask where I am from, ask where I'm a local." And it really just spoke to me. So I grew up in several countries, and I like to say I am multi-local to many of those countries. And I say multi-local and not multinational because our experiences are always more local, rooted in day-to-day interaction with people and memories of local places. So I grew up in Abu Dhabi, Dubai, during the 90s, a very different time and a very different place than what it is today.
Mhm.
My heritage is Indian, which is also very diverse. My first job as an architect was in Doha, Qatar, where my first project was, designing a palace for a queen of Qatar's sheikh. Like, I mean, like, where in the world do you like work on a project like that? I mean, it was a time when, like, literally, like the entire city, like cities after cities across urban Gulf were like under construction. But after I worked there for a brief time, my inquiries were much broader. So I loved urban design and urban planning and asking those larger questions. In terms of like what are those built environment beyond like one single building. And so I moved to London to study at UCL, University College London, where I got my master's in urban planning and design. And so it was Europe after, Middle East. And I lived in an international student's house in central London. My dorm window, it opened to Regent's Park, and it was kind of very close to Sherlock Holmes' house. So, it was, cannot describe enough. Like
From
London was
the
one of the
blazing heat of Dubai to the
like, just
misty
like,
serenity of London in Sherlock Holmes' house. That's quite the difference. So just listen, tell us, you have such a diverse background where you're living. Moving to the United States, what are some of the differences you've noticed about living in a U.S. city compared to somewhere like London or Dubai or, other city or
right.
where in India you're from?
Right. So, again, I mean, similarly, I'm often asked, like, what's your favorite city? I mean, that's something, I exactly cannot answer because each city is unique. And I associate a certain phase of my life, living there. So, however, there are differences out there and there are also commonality of experiences where I see. Now, what are
What are
the
some of the
biggest
differences? Like, we love to hear, right, as Americans, we love to hear good or bad about ourselves compared to
It is.
the rest of the world. So give us some red meat here. Give us like three things that you find a little obnoxious about Americans, or something different that you find, and then three commonalities that you find.
So the biggest difference that comes to my mind is the concept of density and space. So, one may think of Chicago being a big city and may say, like, I would rather live in like a less populated small town or like a fringe suburb. Whereas someone like me, wholeheartedly enjoys the hustle bustle of a giant city and would comfortably live in a dense part of the city. Also, partly because, I always sort of lived in dense populated cities in Asia and Europe. So, based on my experiences, I've coined a new term called comfortable density, meaning it's highly subjective. Why a certain threshold of density is comfortable for someone and it isn't for others. So, for example, uh, and I think it's all based on our values and experiences. Like, do we want a big house and a big SUV as a family need, or sometime just a desire to show like financial status? Or do we enjoy like compact walkable neighborhoods, or, view owning an acre of yard and see no neighbor, as a sign of freedom? Do we value more large private space or a large community public space?
Very good. Yes,
And
you're hitting on, right, the private realm versus the public realm. So if you move to the city, right, you might have to trade a bit of your private realm, but your public realm will explode. I mean, just enormous, possibilities of destinations. And I'm with you. I think, I think your term, what, comfortable density, or what was it exactly?
yes, comfortable density. That's
Comfortable
my own
density.
personal
Yes.
term that
Yes.
I've called it. Again, this doesn't relate just to the type of housing or the public spaces, but with that, the transportation, the type of transportation that is derived from this concept of density. So, do we value public transportation, which is, serving large densities as freedom, or driving a private car in a low density, like, lower density sprawl as freedom? Like
My
that,
my gripe about Americans that you're talking about, one of the differences is, our culture is so car centric that we've been taught to think that anyone who takes public transportation either has a DUI or a substance abuse problem. And that is something we have to change. And I know you and your staff are working hard on that, because Chicago has great public transportation options, but there's so much more potential in the city as well. Where do you see the biggest growth? I mean, is it in rail, or is it in bus rapid transit? I mean, how can we get around more efficiently in the city and safely?
Right. So again, there are efforts that are needed at every different level. It can be one or the two. So, for example, the transit component of the transportation also goes hand in hand with like biking and walking. So,
Mhm.
for example, we always talk about first mile and last mile problem with transit. So, for example, our day to day, common person experience, you get down from a bus or a train and you're like, okay, now I need to get to my house. Do you walk to your house, or do you need another, second mode of transportation to get to home? So whether you park your car in a parking lot,
Mhm.
which is right next to a train station, or is it your home is so close by that, 10 minutes walk and you don't mind doing that? Or do you have to depend on some other means, like maybe somebody comes to pick you up? Or do you have a bike that you take on a train, or again, you can park your bike there and you just bike home? So there is that connection that is needed, from that first mile or the last mile, either at home or at work. Again, same thing, like when you get off from the
I
train
agree.
and going to the office, do you walk there? Do you have to take another second mode of transportation like a bus? So, that is sometimes what, as planners, we look at is deterring people from taking transit, because you're like, well, I'll just get into my car.
So yeah, I agree with you. That's important to figure. Any new ideas about solving that last mile issue that you guys
So,
have?
right. So that is a big, area of research, as well as making a lot of efforts at different levels. I always say, it's like a chicken and an egg conundrum. Like, do we let our values shape built environment, or do we create a built environment to shape our values? It's like, what do we change first? Like, do we make a change and so people get used to adapting to that change, or do we, bring certain change of mindset that would support bringing that change? So there are different options. Like, for this particular question, if as an urban designer, I feel that there is also a component of safety and comfort that comes into picture, especially as a woman. When I'm getting off a train at certain hours, I kind of get off and I'm like, if it is dark, the sidewalk is broken, if there are just some few parked cars, I hardly see any people walking around. I'm like, you know what? I don't feel safe. Even I see my house, I see that building right in front of me, and I would love to just walk. I mean, it's a great weather, there's no, blaming of weather, but it's just that the environment around it, like the surrounding that we've created, there's this perceived, even the place may be even safe, but it's just the look and feel of it. It's like, I don't want to walk. And so, how can we bring change there? Like, as in terms of planning and as an urban designer, I always constantly ask this question in terms of, people are of different ages, different abilities, different genders. So looking into all these perspectives, a lot of people, in terms of transit, really is a lot of women take transit, women with children on transit, older women, old people take transit, disabled people who cannot drive a car take transit. And oftentimes we feel that those are the loyal customers for transit, and we are, less focusing on the needs and requirements of that segment of the population. We think that everybody is young and able-bodied to like get off the transit and figure out their way home or get to the office. So the more question we ask, how we are catering and helping the actual people who are really going to use the transit, I think that's where the solutions lies. And this needs to be addressed and looked at from so many different levels.
Neha, what I'm getting from this is talking to you, with your diverse background of where you're from, the densities of the cities. I mean, London's enormous. It's dense. I can't. What city in India was it? What city in India are you from? Mumbai?
Yeah, close to Mumbai.
Aroundish. Mumbai is huge. But yeah,
it is huge.
Enormous. It blows our concept of what size of a city is here in the U.S. and density too.
Density, the population.
Yeah, the density.
It's very different.
The density, it's beyond our comprehension. And so you mentioned a perspective that you had that one can live in the country, one can live in a small town. But you mentioned to me, and if you could rephrase this, it would greatly help. You mentioned that you can find a nook in the city that you can feel more private and more intimate in than you can sitting in the woods somewhere or in a small town. Do you remember that? Could you tell me a little bit about that? How finding that, how that makes you feel as someone who enjoys big cities?
Absolutely. So what I like to call that is transition spaces. So there is this public domain, and then there's this private world that exists. The more we have those transition spaces, makes things very interesting. So in a big city, let's say we walk into a cafe shop, and the first thing we start looking for is like empty chairs which are sort of facing the sidewalk. Why do we do that? There is a human behavior component to the space planning there. We feel like, okay, I do want to grab that coffee and want my own little space and my own time, my me time. I want to read a book or, work on something. But at the same time, I want to have that visual connectivity, that connection I want to make with people who are just simply walking by on that sidewalk. I still want to have that view looking out somewhere where I am still part of that larger world. Although I am like, not really talking to anyone, not directly interacting with anyone, but then I still want to have feel that part. And then the feeling of that connection, that social connectedness. So, we look for that chair, which is like on a corner, but is still connected with everything else around us. So that's sort of the connection, which I feel like a lot of, as you asked me earlier, the differences between like here and a lot of the other places I've lived elsewhere. I think this kind of transition spaces, which really makes that connection between your private domain and a public domain. I find that, we are partly kind of lacking it because
Yes.
a lot of our cities are not designed for that kind of, walkable spaces where people actually walk. And, there's an important, another concept that I want to talk about, which goes with this, is called chance interaction.
What, chance
Mm,
interaction?
that's-
Okay.
yes.
Yes.
So chance,
I love that.
chance interaction. And, what I mean by here is that you meet people by chance. It's not something you have scheduled on your Outlook calendar or your phone book that, hey, I need to meet this person on this day and this time, and I need to drive to that place and, make a reservation and go through this whole stressful planning to actually even meet someone. So, so even when you look at like even single family homes here, in the past, like you see this home style had those porches, like big porches in the front. Those were connected with sidewalk, same feeling as, were in your small private world, but you are still connected with rest of your community, your neighbors. And I feel like, the more we look at not just planning level, even architecturally, like how do we address those kind of spaces of private versus public spaces, I think a lot of dynamics kind of change around that.
It's amazing. Chance interaction. That's where the great ideas were born, certainly not in the country, but in the cities. Walking on sidewalks, bumping into somebody, start a conversation, and then you realize that, this person has a great idea. I have a great idea. Together, we can start a movement to improve people's lives or business. So, yeah,
Right.
excellent. Chance interaction. I love that. I've written that down.
I
Fantastic.
actually want to add one more
Yes.
little idea to it, like just a fun thing. So, when we see like movies, right? Like in movies, like romantic movies, we see like two people, boarding the same bus and the train, and they're, eyes looking at each other. There's a connection. And then, they start talking, become friends and fall in love. And like that whole story goes around, like how they met by chance. We love this idea. But I always ask this question, if we don't really design our cities that way, how are we ever going to meet somebody like that by chance? We love that idea of, meeting people, who we don't know, like strangers.
Mhm.
And it doesn't happen in vacuum. It happens on our streets, our parks, plazas, buses, trains. And that's where we see people from other parts of the city, other demographics that we usually don't interact day to day. So, those chance interaction can change, how we perceive cities and our spaces, our homes.
How do you correlate health and happiness, with the relationship of you with the built environment? How does that help you? Something you don't think about, right? You think about, well, I got to have healthy relationships. I've got to eat well. I've got to exercise. But the bricks, the cement underneath your feet dictate your health and happiness. And, how should people consider that when they're looking at the way the cement and softscape or earthscape is built together? How should they look at that?
Yes. So, it's a very interesting question. And, I would actually like to, I always like to do like some kind of, fun, small mental exercises about cities. And so I would like to suggest one such example.
Yes.
For example, we all have like a, long bucket list of places that we want to visit, we want to travel to. So, next time you are at a new place, maybe you can just, sort of run this mental little small exercise. Even like it doesn't have to be like visiting a new place. Even if you're seeing a movie, if your favorite movie that has shots in different locations, or scrolling through your, friends' vacation pictures on social media. So, think of like why you enjoyed some places and felt so happy being there. Like, what was it that you really liked? Like, was it the tree-lined charming street that you loved strolling through? Were there surprises, when you're walking by and you were like really surprised by seeing something there? Those little, street signs, the lampposts, the benches, the sidewalk, the pavement design, the plantings, window styles, like the balconies of buildings, brick walls, mosaic of terrazzo, the style of arches and pillars, and those small nooks and corners of streets that excited you. Like, what are the small experiences that you would love to have back in your hometown? Something that you would, let's say you stand up in a town hall meeting and you say, hey, I want to have this in my neighborhood. Like, what are the small things? And those subtle signs, they collectively become the memories of a place. And, oftentimes I say it's really not about a big city or a small city. It's really about the small experiences within that big city. And it's sort of it's a fun way to build our perspective, to relate our day-to-day experiences and engage our senses with the surroundings. Like, we need to connect those dots between, what we are experiencing and how that's happening within a certain type of a build form. How it is shaping our emotions. Our build form is shaping our emotions, and our emotions, is also shaping back this built environment. And so we need to be careful about, understanding like what exactly it is that we are enjoying about that place and what we are supporting building in our cities. Like, and oftentimes these big changes, they happen, much more incrementally and at a much smaller scale. So why do we, for example, there's a sidewalk. Why do we feel differently walking a sidewalk which is next to a parking lot or a dead wall? Or the same sidewalk be next to some really nice public art, beautiful buildings, cafes, shops, boutique stores, bookstores. We feel happy walking when there's something interesting happening next to it. So, observe the small little things and, think like, what do you think you want to have in the neighborhood? Like, oftentimes it's really the small design solutions that really, makes a place more welcoming and comfortable. It makes it happy and healthy. And in a way, personally, I feel like I'm very passionate about what I'm doing, and that's something what really wakes me up each day to bring that difference in our communities.
Yeah, I go, what do you want to be remembered for? What is your 150 years from now, and somebody finds some articles, information about you, what do you want to be remembered for? What is your
Wow.
raison d'être?
Sure. So, as I just, kind of said earlier about all these different experiences, reflecting and introspecting, on my work, I have like, written down one quote that that's my own personal quote. I say that it is the emotions that create built environment. And in turn, the built environment create emotions.
Yes, I was just thinking that. Yeah, a mirror reflexivity between the two.
Between the two. And what I see my role here is, I am a contributor in this cycle of creation and recreation. And, I would like to contribute in making this world, work for everybody. It's a just world for everybody through my skills as an architect and as a planner. Absolutely. Yeah. Happy to connect, reach out. Please reach out.
Reach out. LinkedIn is the best way?
Yes, it is.
Excellent. Okay. All right. Well, Soni, Neha, thanks so much. It has been an excellent podcast. Little tidbits. I mean, we could talk for days and weeks about this, but just little things that you can get from the city and the built environment, how it affects your mood, and how subconsciously you never thought about it, but you're aware of it. It certainly make your day better, and hopefully you can affect change in your small community or large community. So, thanks so much.
Hey, thanks for listening. And check out my website at william-mcpherson.com. Building your health and happiness from the ground on up.